Why did the British lose the Battle of Dunkirk? On the 3rd of September 1939, following the German invasion of Poland, in accordance with a treaty between Poland, Great Britain and France, Great Britain declared war on Germany. On the 4th of September 1939, the BEF, British Expeditionary Force, began moving 160,000 men, many were support staff, 25,000 vehicles, 50 light tanks and 100,000 tons of stores, fuel and ammunition to France. The Secretary of State for War announced that the BEF was equipped in the finest possible manner. This simply was not true. The British Army wasn't ready for war. With war looming, there had been an urgent need to rearm the British Army to modern standards. Successive British governments had never moved beyond discussion and failed to modernise the British Army. In 1939, the British Army was totally unfit to fight a war in Europe to modern standards. It simply did not have the tools to do the job. The British would eventually field 592 tanks, but most were lightly armed, poorly armoured light tanks. The Germans had 2,800 tanks. Between them, the Allies had 3,000 tanks. These were dispersed over a very wide area, while the German tanks were concentrated on several narrow fronts. Although about to fight a war where tanks would play a major role, British anti-tank guns were inadequate, consisting mainly of 2-pounders, while the Germans had the formidable 88 anti-aircraft anti-tank gun, which went through British tanks like they were made of paper. BEF transport was insufficient and vehicles had to be requisitioned from civilian firms. Many were in a poor state of repair. The French had by far the much larger army, and major decisions on strategy were made by them. France's mighty Maginot Line was astonishingly strong, but its weakness was that it ended 200 miles from the North Sea. French strategy was to establish an effective defence on the frontiers of France. When the Germans attacked through Holland and Belgium, the French and British armies would pivot and advance rapidly to the River Dyle in Belgium. An attack by the Germans through the Ardennes had been briefly considered by the French, but rejected. As such, the French Ninth Army, their weakest army, took up position opposite the Ardennes. The armies with the furthest to travel, the French 7th, the BEF and the French First Armies, were fully mechanised. At the pivot point, the French Ninth Army didn't need to move far, had almost no transport, little equipment, only a few light tanks, no full-time professional officers, and was the weakest in the French order of battle. The French and British army settled down on the Belgian border, waiting patiently to be attacked by the Germans. Across the Belgian border in Germany, 2 German armies, Army Group B to the north with 28 divisions, 3 armoured and 1 motorised. Army Group A to the south with 44 divisions, 7 armoured and 3 motorised, were poised to smash their way through the Belgian defences. At dawn on the 10th of March, a heavy air attack developed over the British sector. The BEF came to immediate readiness and crossed into Belgium. The British and French armies quickly reached their planned destinations, but the unmechanised French Ninth Army failed to reach its objective on time. There was an unexpected and overwhelming thrust by 2 German armour divisions on the front of the French Ninth Army. The German army swept through the impassable Ardennes and smashed through the French Ninth Army. On the 15th of May, the French First Army, on the right of the BEF, began to get into difficulties. German Panzers punched a 5,000-yard wide hole through it. The French army had not established a reserve, and once their line had broken, they had no way to plug it. Erwin Rommel wrote in his diary, "The way to the west is open." On each side of the BEF, fighting fiercely, the French and Belgian armies began to fall back. The British army held firm, refused to give ground, and the German army was thrown back. Although the BEF were holding their ground against savage German attacks, they were ordered to withdraw to the Scheldt River. The BEF were desperately short of anti-tank guns and artillery. The 98th Field Regiment could only post a single gun at 7 critical points. British gunners lacked everything except courage. They held up the enemy with magnificent self-sacrifice until killed or taken prisoner. 20th of May. German Army Group A reaches the French coast. The BEF and much of the French army are now cut off from its supply dumps, fuel, ammunition, food and armoured reinforcements. 21st of May. The British counterattack and penetrate the German line for 10 kilometres, but are forced to withdraw to avoid being cut off. 23rd May. The British counterattack has shaken von Rundstedt and, fearing he would be cut off, halts his Panzers. 50% of his Panzers have been destroyed or have broken down. On the 24th of May, the Germans mount a heavy attack on the Belgian and British lines. To the left of the BEF, 13 miles of the Belgian front was pushed back 1.5 miles, and a breach began to develop. The Belgian army fails to counterattack. By the 27th of May, the Belgian army was broken in two and cut off from the BEF. It was short of ammunition and without armour or air support. Without informing the French or British, King Leopold III of Belgium asked Hitler for an armistice. 20 miles of the front on the British left flank now lay dangerously open. General Gort ordered Montgomery with the British 5th and 50th Divisions to abandon preparations for a counterattack and move to plug the hole in the Belgian line. In a brilliant night manoeuvre, Montgomery sidestepped his division to the left of the British front and filled the gap. The British were now holding a front of 87 miles with only 7 divisions and 2 in reserve. Although holding firm, once again the British army was ordered to fall back, this time to the final perimeter, the canals around Dunkirk. Attack and counterattack had destroyed most of the British and French tanks, and there was no hope of replacements. Evacuating the British Expeditionary Force from Dunkirk was a great success. 338,226 men had been rescued, but the cost was high. 68,000 men of the British Armed Forces had been killed, wounded or taken prisoner. Many would spend 5 years in prisoner of war camps. The British Army had suffered a crushing defeat at Dunkirk, but had survived to fight again. In the North African desert, Montgomery would again meet Rommel, and with the help of Commonwealth forces beat him. In 1944, the British would return to Europe, and with its allies, the USA, Canada and Poland, beat Rommel again.